Animation has always interested me. In many circumstances, studios prefer the format to live action due to budgeting. Sets cost money, actors are paid for time and travel costs, and special effects aren't free. However, as a contract animator in Seattle, I've been offered anything from $10 an hour to animate a project to over $45. This is where the big question comes in. How much is an animated project actually worth? John Kricfalusi, creator of Ren and Stimpy, made $136,723 to produce an 11-minute cartoon. Regardless of whether it was good or not, the fact is that is how much he made. And the initial proposed budget was $110,000. Was this a ripoff? I broke down a significant number of TV shows and their total budgeting per 22-minute block. However, I want you to take into account this also costs writers and actors as well as the animation. So, South Park, $300,000 an episode on average. Futurama, $1.2 million per episode. Aqua Teen, $60,000 an episode. Current SpongeBob, $700,000. Family Guy, $2 million per episode. This is where it gets a little confusing. There is no exact number for what John K's original show, The Ren and Stimpy Show, cost. So I took into account the budget for SpongeBob and the budget for Ren and Stimpy's adult party cartoon in 2003, and then I just adjusted for inflation. So doing my math, I figure the show cost roughly $300,000 in 1991 money. That's $300,000 per 22-minute show. Ergo, it would cost $150,000 per 11-minute segment in 1991. However, in 2019 money, an 11-minute show would have cost just over $240,000. So, in an unusual way, Cans Without Labels, John K's Kickstarter, actually took a 54% pay cut from what I think it should have been. I imagine this is due to him having a significantly smaller staff to work with, but I don't want to speculate that much. The fact of the matter is that the cartoon cost less than it could have by LA animation standards. But why should it cost that much at all? Animation is a career where I see people frequently racing to the bottom. The sheer number of animators I see on websites like Fiverr or Elance tend to work for like $10 to $20 per hour. I've worked on 2 TV pilots, and one of them cost $40,000 roughly, and another cost about $70,000. That's not nearly as much as one would cost in LA. And the problem I see is that animation has no apparent set worth outside of what you might deem in the Animators Union in LA. I mean, think about it this way. We now live in a world where Hot Diggity Demon can get Patreon money for his stuff, and a bunch of Flash animators can all live in some sort of exhausted cabin to make their budgets work for them. This has severely rocked the fundamental concept of animation and its inherent value. Outside of that, animation has garnered a divisive opinion, where shows like The Simpsons are criticized because their characters are too on model, and shows like South Park and BoJack Horseman exist now, which are very well praised, and they laugh at the concept of keyframe perfectionism. So what I'm getting down to, animation doesn't have to look good to be good. It's about the content, and that's where John K's stuff is. It is animation over content. So, did John K rip us off? I'm gonna say probably. I think that animating 24 frames of non-stop insanity is just too much for me to look at, to the point where it made me nauseous to look at it. This same problem actually plagued the adult party cartoon, where every frame has to be drawn, every 24th of a second. Nowadays, most shows like The Simpsons, they're on 2s, which means for every 24th of a second, you use half of that, so 12 frames a second. If John K had gone to a studio in Hollywood and requested the amount of money that the Kickstarter made, he probably would have been laughed out of the office for asking for so little. Kricfalusi's problems stem far more from the fact that he was phased out of the LA animation mainstream, or exiled, than the budget he was actually asking for. Now, if he had gone indie and put together maybe a Patreon to create content and learned to focus his efforts on creating less drawings per second, like he did with his early Flash cartoons in the late 90s, he likely would have been able to live somewhat comfortably just doing cartoons. Unfortunately, that is not how the world works. John K is insanely overdue with his final product. Years overdue. So overdue that if you were born when the cartoon was funded, you'd actually be the target audience for it now. And for a cartoon that would have been deemed good enough maybe for like an indie short film festival nowadays. I think that John K's writing style, since it was all storyboard driven, there's no substance in the actual characterization. So Ren and Stimpy really marketed the funny faces and the weird expressions and the extreme close-ups, which in '98 SpongeBob started doing. But coupled with that, SpongeBob had a writing team that actually put effort into the story, and I think that's where John K's content falls short now. The world just seems to have passed John K by, and maybe that's due to the fact that he was outed by several sources as a groomer of underage girls, but regardless of any of those allegations, John K always missed his deadlines with his cartoons and now with his career.